Welcome back to TEDxYouth at Saddle River Day. Get ready for some inspiring talks and amazing performances in Session 2, Looking Within. First up is sophomore Jesslyn Savage, who will be talking about following your passion and following your dreams. Please give a warm welcome to Jesslyn and let's get the show on the road.
My alarm goes off. It's 7 a.m. I turn off my alarm and head to the bathroom. I take a hot shower to wake me up for the morning. I come out, get dressed, do my hair, grab my bag, and walk out the door. I'm ready for the day until I remember I didn't grab my coffee before leaving my apartment this morning. There's a Starbucks on every block in the city, so I stop at the nearest one on my way to work. I order my usual, 1 venti pink drink and a bagel. I walk in and catch the elevator up to the 52nd floor. I say good morning to my assistant and make my way down the hall. I open up the glass door to my office overlooking New York City. The door finally closes behind me and the words read, Jesslyn Savage, Senior Editor of the New York Times. I love when people ask me what I want to be when I grow up because it reminds me of this ever so constant dream of mine. With every waking moment, I think about how I can come closer to my dream of being a journalist and writer. If you had come to me 6 years ago and told me that I'd be an aspiring writer, I probably would have looked at you like you were crazy, but somehow that became my reality. I never thought writing was something I would get myself into. I wrote when I was required to, and outside of those prompted times, writing wasn't something I did. But 4th grade was the year something was revealed to me. I actually really enjoyed writing. Loved it, actually, and was pretty good at it for being a 9-year-old. Reading was always something I found quite enjoyable, and I still do to this day. My friends always make fun of me because for Christmas or birthdays I ask for books. Yes, books. You're probably looking at me like I'm crazy or an introvert, but if you know me at all, you know I'm the complete and total opposite. I'm just someone who appreciates a good read every once in a while, and this habit of reading pretty regularly helped me develop my writing skills from a young age. I continue to read and write, and I have been doing so ever since then. Writing transforms my mind into a landscape of imagination, ingenuity, and freedom. I'm in control. I control the good, the bad, and the in-between. It's a safe space where anything I want can happen. My insecurities fade, and I suddenly feel this rush of confidence, capability, and intellect that makes the experience of writing that much more impactful. In more recent times, I've been thinking about what I want to pursue professionally and came to the conclusion that I want to pursue journalism. When I first told my mom I wanted to be a journalist, she asked what kind. I initially said political, but recently curved my interest to investigative journalism. When I told my mom about my change in focus, she was a little concerned. And when I say a little concerned, I mean a lot concerned. Investigative journalists are responsible for uncovering the truth about corrupt people and organizations. This is especially dangerous for one reason. Not everyone wants to be exposed for their wrongdoings. Along with investigative journalism being very dangerous, being any kind of journalist nowadays can be just as risky. In June of 2019, 5 people were killed while working at the Capital Gazette newsroom in Annapolis. As of this year, 10 journalists have been physically harmed. On a more specific occasion, one reporter was punched in the face and had her phone stolen while interviewing voters in California. During the recent George Floyd protests, several reporters have been physically injured with cuts or bruises or tear gassed. We were with a group of media and thought we were in a safe spot. We kept saying we're media. Police tear gassed and pepper sprayed the entire group, posted KSTP Eyewitness News journalist Ryan Raish on Twitter. On numerous occasions during the George Floyd protests, journalists have been harmed for no reason other than for reporting the happenings at the time. I see all of this and it scares me half to death, but it doesn't scare me enough that I would stop pursuing my interest and passion. Despite all of this violence and hatred for journalists, I plan to use my experience to make change in the world. I'm sure some of you watch or listen to news stations like MSNBC or Fox News. You see these people on your screens or hear them through your devices, but you might not realize what makes this process a success. Here, I'll give you an example. Think of an operating room. In an OR, you have a lead surgeon, an assist, an anesthesiologist, a certified registered nurse, an OR nurse, a surgical technician, a resident, a physician's assistant, and a medical device company representative. Yes, all of these people bunched up in a room have differing jobs of differing importance, if you will, but they all work together in a conglomerate effort to achieve a common goal, saving a life. The key word here is conglomerate. According to Google, a conglomerate is a number of different things or parts that are put or grouped together to form a whole but remain distinct entities. This word is the embodiment of how organizations and businesses are made. Different people coming together to complete the same task and accomplish the same goals. You may be asking how this relates back to me wanting to use my seemingly small ability to make such large contributions, but this picture I'm trying to create is bigger than me. In every aspect of life, an underdog is always needed, whether it be a writer for a small column in a paper or a janitor at a school. These little intricacies make a difference in the larger scheme of things. Think of them as support beams on a house. If you take them away, the house collapses. I say this all to say that you as an individual have to look inside yourself and find that one thing that you enjoy, no matter how small it is, and use your love and passion to contribute and make a difference. Despite how small your passion, talent, or dream seems, you are and can be one of the pieces of the puzzle to make envisioned change a reality.
Thank you, Jess. I'm looking forward to conquering my dreams no matter how big.
Performing next will be Junior Sherry Chi playing, and now I hope I pronounced this correctly, Allegro Appassionate Opera 43 by St. John's. Give it up for Sherry.
What a beautiful way to continue our second session. Thank you, Sherry. Our next speaker will be discussing an election reform. Give it up for Eli Wenger.
It was spring of last year when I got bored in class and decided I needed a break. I excused myself, opened up my phone on the way to the bathroom, and it was there that I read some of the scariest words I've ever read in my entire life, written by my best friend. I'm hiding under my desk right now. They said there's someone in my school with a gun. Whatever happens, I love you. Whatever happens, I love you. I responded with immediate concern, asking Sam, what's happening? Are you alright? I walked around in a daze for the next couple of hours, thinking to myself, is that the last time I'll hear from him? Will he become just another name on the far too long list of names of those who have been victims of gun violence, of those who have died in Parkland and in Belmont and in Santa Fe, and every day in impoverished urban communities? Until finally, he told me that it was over. It was a false alarm. He had hid under his desk for 3 hours until they could confirm that there was no danger, until they could confirm that there was no gun. Still in shock, I began to search for a reason why there was ever a possibility of a gun in the first place. I thought, surely the American people realized the urgency of this issue. So I went looking, and found out that I was right. In October of 2016, according to Gallup, 61% of Americans support stricter gun laws. In the greatest democracy on earth, if almost 2/3 of the people support any given position, surely it should be reflected in our laws. So I checked another poll from August of 2019 and found that 63% of people support tighter restrictions. A different poll found that 89% of Americans want expanded background checks, and 75% favor an optional buyback program. I began to look at other topics, hoping that gun policy was an anomaly and that the people's views would be better represented on other subjects. But what I found just confirmed what I already feared. While 60% of Americans oppose a border wall, the current administration plans on building one. While 66% of Americans support the legalization of marijuana, it remains illegal at the federal level. And while 93% of Americans think people who are gay and lesbian should have the same job opportunities as heterosexual individuals, many states still allow discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. On a host of important topics, there is a pattern of ignoring the will of the American people. A study conducted by Northwestern and Princeton professors confirms this, with the two most important charts in American society. These charts show the percent of Americans that support a law compared to the likelihood that that law will be passed. Makes sense, right? In a real democracy, the chart would look something like this. You can see that there is a positive correlation. The greater the support, the greater the chance that a law will be passed. Okay, great. So this would be our ideal democracy. But the problem comes with the next chart. Here, the black line is almost horizontal, meaning that the preferences of these people mean little to nothing to our government. The difference between these two charts is the first measures the influence of the economic elite, while the second chart shows the influence of the average citizen. So this is our democracy. The study concludes that the average American has a non-significant, near-zero impact on public policy in the United States. Why? In our government, it takes a crazy amount of money in order to even compete in an election. Because the only people who can afford to give these exorbitant amounts of money are the wealthy, they're the ones who our representatives are indebted to. This power disparity, together with other institutional barriers, combine to create the issue at the root of every problem in our country. Our democracy doesn't work because our democracy doesn't work for all of us. In fact, it doesn't even work for a majority of us. The solution to this fundamental issue is simple. Give the average voter a voice. We can fix our democracy, but only by radically changing the way elections are run in this country. So let's start with the very first thing we need to fix. Before even officially declaring their candidacy, most candidates will make sure that they have some plausible path to victory. This means that they need to figure out where their money is coming from. This is when election season really starts. The unfortunate thing is that this crucial part of the electoral process only includes a minute portion of the American electorate, who are overwhelmingly white and wealthy. Many attempts have been made to curb the influence of the ultra-wealthy by limiting donations from corporations and special interests. Almost every attempt has been struck down by the courts as unconstitutional. Right now, wealthy individuals, corporations, and organizations which contribute to political campaigns are the people who our representatives are indebted to. This includes only 0.47% of the American public, which gives more than $200 to candidates, political parties, or political action committees. This tiny elite, this 0.47%, contributes 71% of the total funding for these groups. This requires the political establishment to spend crazy amounts of time courting not even 0.5% of the American public. The typical congressperson spends more than half their time fundraising, and senators spend even more than that. Due to this, we have a vicious cycle where the top 1% donate money to politicians that in turn pass laws which help them to make more money, which they then use to effect more laws. The result is a government run by the rich. But if we can't outlaw donations from the elite, then how do we change our system? Former 2020 presidential candidate Andrew Yang said, "Money talks in this country. The problem is that speaking for the companies. You have to have the money speak for the people." So what if we did that? What if we had the money speak for the people? Well, we can do that with a plan called Democracy Dollars. The plan is simple. For federal elections, we give every U.S. citizen vouchers, which they can redeem when they want to donate to a political campaign. Everyone will now have the option to donate up to $200 to political campaigns. The catch? Only candidates who refuse donations of more than $200 will be eligible to receive this money. So now our politicians are forced to choose between the large dollar donations of the few and democracy dollars, between the elite and the people. In Seattle in 2015, voters decided to give democracy dollars a chance. The results were astounding. The number of small dollar donations more than tripled in just 2 years, and 84% of those participating in the voucher system had never before donated to a political campaign. Democracy dollars finally leveled the playing field. Now that we know it works, it's time for us to stand and fight for the same type of change in our own communities. It's time for a national democracy voucher system. These so-called democracy dollars are a good first step in reforming our democracy, but that's all it is, a first step. In addition to contributing massively to political campaigns, wealthy people also vote more often because of the institutional barriers in place which prevent many in vulnerable communities from voting. Factors such as voter ID laws, a lack of accessibility to voter registration, and a lack of time contribute to America's lackluster voter turnout. In fact, the United States ranked 26 out of 32 developed countries as voter turnout in our country rarely exceeds 60%. The difference between the US and other developed nations is that these other countries have policies in place which actively encourage voter turnout. Policies such as automatic voter registration, mail-in ballots, early voting, and making Election Day a national holiday would improve voter turnout in the United States, as these policies have been proven to do across the world. The data tells the truth. When you make voting more accessible, more people will vote. You shouldn't have to jump through hoops to vote. It should be easy. Let's turn now to the actual voting, where another problem awaits us. The 2000 presidential election was one of the closest in recent history, and an especially tumultuous moment in this election was when George Bush was declared the victor of Florida, and with it, the election. You can see here that Bush won Florida with less than 0.1%. He won by only 537 votes. But the most interesting thing is when you take a look at the percentages, you see that neither Gore or Bush won a majority of the vote. Both of the major party candidates combined only won about 98% of the vote. So where did this crucial 2% go? In a close race, when even the tiniest advantage can grant you victory, why is it that 2% of the vote seems to have gone missing? Well, that 2% voted mostly for a man named Ralph Nader. In 2000, he was the presidential nominee for the Green Party, who are closest in ideology with the Democratic Party, meaning that while these voters cast their ballot for Nader, a vast majority of them would have preferred a Democrat to a Republican. Now, simple math dictates that if these people's preferences had been taken into account, Gore would have won Florida, and with it the election. However, the preferences of these people were ignored, and the candidate who stood most fervently opposed to their ideals was in fact the victor of the election. This is what's called the spoiler effect, and it's the reason why so many people are no longer willing to risk their vote for a third-party candidate, so they're forced to choose between two candidates who don't actually share their values. This allows the two major parties to control the entirety of our political system, because they have the safety of being able to ignore huge chunks of voters while still reliably winning their votes. In order to win an election, you don't even need to be liked in our system. You can be hated. You just have to make sure that your opponent is even more hated. The system that we currently have in place is one that encourages the two major parties to negatively campaign because there are no other viable options. This is why we need to implement ranked choice voting, so that voters can rank the candidates in order of preference. This way, people can still vote their conscience, but if their candidate has the least amount of support, then all these people will then be counted towards their second choice. This happens as many times as are necessary until one candidate has a majority of the vote. A perfect example of this is the 2018 congressional election in Maine's 2nd District, where there were 4 main candidates. Using traditional voting, the Republican incumbent would have won with only 46.3% of the vote. But thanks to ranked choice voting, Jared Golden won the election because he was able to appeal to a broader base of supporters. With ranked choice voting in place, politicians can no longer afford to take your vote for granted. With ranked choice voting, everyone is heard. The reason why Florida was such a big deal in the 2000 election was because, despite Bush only winning by about 500 votes, he was able to win all of the state's 25 electoral college votes. This means that not one of the 2.9 million Floridians who voted for Gore had any effect on the outcome of the election. This happens in almost every state because the Electoral College works as a winner-take-all system where the loser's supporters are essentially ignored. The Electoral College perhaps has an even more dramatic effect in states that tend to consistently vote one way or the other, making it so that politicians only have to pay attention to a selection of swing states like Florida. The fact that this system essentially ignores those on the losing side of each state's election means that the votes of almost everyone outside these swing states don't matter. The result of this is that the Electoral College has allowed victories for candidates who lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College. In 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016, the person elected president actually received less votes than their opponents. The Electoral College has acted as the middleman of our democracy for centuries. It's time we make our politicians deal directly with the American people and respect their wishes. This means abolishing the Electoral College. The person with the most votes should win. Why does the 4th grader realize this before the Harvard alums in Congress? So, we've solved the issue of wealth influencing our election by promoting democracy dollars. We've registered almost everyone to vote. We have modernized our voting system to increase turnout, and we have eliminated our unfair voter system by implementing ranked choice voting and abolishing the Electoral College. Unfortunately, even if we did all of this, it would still likely make very little difference in Congress. Why? because almost every single congressional election is decided before one vote has even been cast. In 2018, only 50 congressional races were decided by less than a 5% margin. This means that out of 435 House races, only 50 of them were close. That's only 11% of House races. And it's not because voters loved the winning candidate. In fact, in November of 2018, 74% of the people disapproved of Congress's job performance. So, if not the overwhelming popularity of Victor, what is the reason why nearly 89% of House races weren't competitive? The answer is gerrymandering. If you don't know what gerrymandering is, it's simple. Every congressperson is elected by a congressional district, and it's the process of dividing up states into these congressional districts where the problem lies. Gerrymandering is the practice of manipulating the boundaries of each district to give one party the upper hand in elections. If there are 50 people, and you know that 20 of them are going to vote red, and the rest are going to vote blue, you can get tons of different results by splitting these people into their 5 congressional districts differently. Now, let's take a real example. In 2010, across the country, Republicans were in charge of redistricting. Then, in 2014, when 1.4 million more people voted for Democrats, Republicans held a more than 50-seat majority in Congress. This happens because the people who decide how to draw congressional districts are the same people who hold the power every 10 years when it comes time to redraw the districts. The result of this gerrymandering is obvious. The will of the people is subverted by the political establishment. This is done all across the country by both major parties. Gerrymandering is more than enough proof that politicians can't regulate themselves. A bipartisan commission of statisticians should be in control of redistricting because they're the experts on the topic and they won't allow any personal bias to sway their decision. These are things that definitely can't be said about politicians. The numbers should dictate redistricting, not personal biases. Right now, gerrymandering is not only legal, but prevalent in our society, and we need to eliminate it. Politicians shouldn't pick their voters. The voters should pick their politicians. The problem, unfortunately, isn't coming up with the solutions for these issues. The solutions already exist. The problem is implementing these new ideas. And the only way we can do that is with your help. All of the ideas I mentioned up here are meaningless without the people to act on them, and we've already seen how powerful such activism has been. In the past, the civil rights movement passed laws state by state to protect minority communities, and eventually, this led to federal laws that did the same for people across the nation. We need to do the same thing now to fix our democracy. There are organizations you can donate to or volunteer with that work tirelessly every day to promote a real democracy. You can even help just by sharing videos and talks like mine that spread awareness about the erosion of our basic rights. But most of all, for those of you over 18, the best thing you can do is spend a couple of minutes looking at candidates running for office near you and vote for the ones who favor democracy. Because even with all the obstacles in our way, if we all come together and unite behind change, if we pledge to protect democracy, we can still win. With your help, we can protect kids like me and my friend Sam, so that instead of composing our last words, we spend our time in school learning how to build a better world for all of us, where no kid has to hide under their desk for fear of a gun. Together, we can build on the progress that's already been made in Maine, where ranked choice voting is in effect, and in Seattle, where democracy dollars has had such a massive effect. Together, we can stand tall and proud for democracy, and we can fight for our rights. We must move forward together. We must vote together. And if we do all this, we will win together.
Wow, that was a lot. We know you had more to say, so I look forward to following up with you further. I know I certainly learned a lot. Thank you, Eli. Next up is sophomore Cravon Dawkins, who will be sharing a poem with us he wrote himself, called The Common Human Nightmare.
Hey guys, I'm Cravon, and the name of my poem is The Common Human Nightmare. Fear is an extraordinary power. Choose to embrace it or allow it to consume you. Fear of dying is different. It stops you from being true. We wonder what it would be like telling someone they are pretty or the meanest person you've ever met, climbing to the top of a mountain, or diving to the depths of an ocean. To live with a smile on your face or remain with a never-changing frown, kissing that someone for the first time or never attempting to kiss them at all. Unlike some, the opportunity is what most have. It is better to choose to use it to an advantage instead of a barrier of progressions.
Beautifully done. A true poet. Thank you, Craven. Next up is sophomore Alice Shue talking about the survivorship bias.
Hello guys, my name is Alice Shue. Today, I'm honored to talk about some ideas about survivorship bias in regards to my personal understanding of it and enlightenment this fallacy might bring. Wait, survivorship bias? What a weird academic noun. I think most of you have never heard of it, but no worries. To help you understand this definition, we will start from one real example in history. In World War II, statistician Abraham Ward of University of Columbia was asked to use his professional skill to analyze the given data in order to minimize American aircraft's losses to enemy fire. A study of damage zones on aircraft that had returned from missions was produced. Here is an hypothetical graph showing bullet holes of returning planes. To protect important parts of them, armor was recommended to be added on the most needed part. Now here comes a question for you. Look at the choices you have. Which part should you care the most about? Take a moment and try to think like a real professor. Don't you tell me you want them all. Nope, it's not gonna work. Too much armor does no good to the aircraft's agility. Take your time. Time up! The correct answer is A and D. No matter if you get it right by your sheer luck, being a military expert, or you're just the smartest guy in the world. Well, you made the same choice as the professor of University of Columbia. Congrats! For those who did not, maybe you can gain some inspirations from explanations which come after. Let's investigate the logic chain behind this question. You might think of something like, those parts which have so many red points must be vulnerable, so we should add protections to them. Well, you ran into logic bias. Yeah, that's a trap. In this case, the sample for this research contained only aircrafts that returned safely, being shot by enemy fire. For the areas which get dense red dots, being hit is not a huge problem for these planes to keep on flying. How about those blank parts? Well, the integrity of those areas is crucial to aircraft's safety, so when those essential places are being penetrated, it is unlikely it will return safely and survive. Therefore, more attention should be paid to the areas with fewer bullet holes, which should be the cockpit and the engine. See what kind of trap you might jump into? That's a classic example of survivorship bias, and that's the thing we're going to talk about today. Just like learning a lesson. Let's start from the definition part. Like what I said, I will use the intro example we just dealt with to help you understand this concept. The survivors are planes back from the battlefield. They are just a part of the whole. Conclusions based on them are not representative and persuasive enough. The invisible samples are fallen planes that were shot and failed to show up. In this case, they are not the majority, but the data of them is what people should care about. Remember, what you see is always a tip of the iceberg. The larger part always hides under the water, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Now it looks not so complex and confusing, right? But there's still a long distance between knowing the definition and using it practically in real life. To go through this process, we need to understand a question first. Why are things we ignored invisible to us? My answer is information goes beyond filtering before you reach them. I divide informational selections into two categories: inner selection and outer selection. Just like what the picture shows, only a part of the information can surpass the blockages of inner and outer selections and appear to us. This determines that the range for us of being able to know something is always being limited. Now you might ask, you mentioned two things I have never heard of. What are inner and outer selections? Well, I created them. Let's start from the outer selection first. So I call every selection that is not determined by oneself the outer selection. Now you might ask, you mentioned two things I have never heard of. What are inner and outer selections? Well, I created them. Let's start from the outer selection first. So I call every selection that is not determined by oneself the outer selection. What about the inner selections? Inner selections are selections that finished by your own body. They are more unpredictable and more out of one's imagination. Let's take a look at some visual examples. This is a picture showing the appearance of one daisy from humans and bees' eyes. What bees see and what we see are completely different. The reason is that the ranges of wavelengths being accepted by humans and bees' eyes have a slight difference, which causes huge differences in their corresponding perception. How about dogs? You want to know something about your honest friends? Here is a processed picture. What dogs see is gray. How about dogs? Want to know what our honest friends see? Here is a processed picture. What dogs see is gray. Are dogs and us looking at the same thing? Of course! Actual things do not change, but our bodies always present us with information in their own way. Information is always being selected. Alright, we had gone through a lot, but the talk is only halfway down. Now you might say, oh come on, hold on dude, you were cramming tons of knowledge to me. How is this related to me? What can I get from knowing all this? Well, I would say understanding this concept is very beneficial to all of us, because survivorship bias is one of the most common logic mistakes that hit our head every day. It impacts us without being perceived. I list out 4 most important benefits of knowing survivorship bias. To make it fun and believable, I added many things you might be familiar with, but they will bring you something new, something different from your previous perception. First, conclusions based on one certain range of information might be misguided. Now, I'm going to show you that conclusions look very different when you get different information from the same thing. What we are going to do is play a little game. Do you like puzzles? I do. I enjoy the process of finding connection between different pieces and gradually approaching to the complete picture step by step. What we are going to do is very similar. I'm going to show you guys some milk puzzles with numbers on it. What you need to do is find out the common categories those numbers belong to. Here we go. Here comes the first one. 2, 8, 34. What category of number do they belong to? Yeah, just the first question. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. They are even numbers. 1, 3, 5, 13, 21. What's the similarity? They are odd numbers. 5 and 55. They are multiples of 5. How about 2, 3, 5, 13? Yeah, this is a hard one. Things are getting complex right now. They are the multiples of 3. 2, 3, 5, 13. Yeah, this is a hard one. Things are getting complex right now. They are the prime numbers. Here's the last one. 3, 21, 144. To be honest, if you don't get this one, it is fine, because we're neither playing Kahoot or trying to squeeze out your brains just like what your math teachers always do. You got the answer? They are the multiples of 3. After finishing all this, you might wonder, how are those puzzles related to our topic? Well, have you noticed anything interesting? Take a look at the positions of the same numbers on different puzzles. Yes, I did not change the position of any number. And when we piece those numbers together, you will get this image. The numbers might look familiar to you. I believe most of us have heard of the name of this set of numbers. They are Fibonacci numbers. The fascinating thing is that all these numbers are part of the Fibonacci numbers, but they can also be parts of other categories. If I do some manipulation and put certain numbers together, you will infer a completely different conclusion from the selected information. To prevent this from happening, what we can do is get as much believable information as you can. Generally, the more evidence you have, the more precise the conclusion can be. It is unlikely for human beings to gain all kinds of information they need, which means, fundamentally, they are not able to make everything on the right track. Nobody is perfect. Anyone's time and energy are limited. This fact determines that we cannot know everything, even if that's something we're very interested in, we spend a lot of time with, or you just dedicate your life to it. Since we, as human beings, are not able to spend time and energy unlimitedly. Yes, we're on the process of learning once we're still alive, but there is always fish escaping from the net for all kinds of reasons. Individual differences determine the way we think and gain information. So our concern and range of knowledge diverge. Next time, when your close ones say something like, "I'm sorry, but I don't know about that." Let's think about the cognitive difference caused by information gap between you guys. Before yelling at the guy, "Why are you so ignorant? Everyone except you knows about it." Be tolerant. There's always something you don't know. Don't be arrogant or blindly confident about everything. Do you know about Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs? Oh yeah, famous entrepreneurs. What do they have in common? They're rich, successful, and they all dropped out of their college and created their own business empire. Sounds admirable. But I've always heard of ideas based on this fact like, you don't need a degree to succeed, or reading books is just useless. In fact, education always helps. Most of us need colleges to offer us professional knowledge and to expand interpersonal relationship. Those stars shine and people talk about their legendary experience only because they're the lucky few who are outstanding enough to let everyone see them. 70% of Americans will take a 4-year college, but only 2/3 of them graduate with a degree. Where do the rest of them go? Think about this. This is a classic survivorship bias and also a heavy blow to those who have mysterious confidence on their luck. Don't buy the lottery because you're not going to win the big prize anyway. Fourth, keep the mind of suspicion to things. The old adage says, seeing is believing. But through the visual examples you just saw, you probably have gotten my idea that your eyes can deceive you. The same, what you know can also be wrong. Many theories being worshipped as the law of the world and great discoveries of time were proven wrong after centuries. As technology develops, we can find more hidden evidence pointing to the truth. Now it's about the end of this talk. But before that, take an inner look at yourself. Might this logic bias affect you? In which way? Do you realize what you see might lead you toward the wrong conclusion? Leave these questions for yourself. Maybe one day they can provide you a new perspective to view things. That's all I want to share with you today. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Alice, for your enlightening talk.
Welcoming back to the stage is Susanna Bobs playing Bach Courant Suite No. 4.
We knew you couldn't get enough of Susanna. I know I can listen to her for days. Thank you, Susanna. Wondering why I'm smiling right now? Just wait and find out. Please give a warm welcome to Jennifer Malath, who will be discussing the science behind happiness.
Not too long ago, I was sitting on my living room floor after my sons had gone to bed, trying to take in the events of the last year. My father, who was never sick a day in his life, had just died of Alzheimer's at the age of 61. My marriage, which had cracks in it that I had never seen, was over. My job, which I loved and thought I was pretty good at, was eliminated. And my shoebox of a house, for which I had sacrificed more than I could afford, was literally falling apart on top of me, with plumbing leaks and ceiling pieces crumbling down. And all I could think of was this class I had taught called Principles of Positive Psychology, whose main point was how only 10% of our happiness is determined by our circumstances. Yeah, right. And then I was reminded of all the students I had written college recommendations for, who had worked so hard to get into the college of their dreams. A lot of them Ivy League or other top-tier institutions, and a large number of them who transferred after the first year because they just weren't happy. And as horrible as it sounds, I actually smiled. Not because I was happy that they were unhappy enough to have to leave one school for another, but because it gave some credibility to this hippy-dippy, goddessy, circly, kumbaya idea that maybe, just maybe, our overall happiness is not determined by our circumstances. I mean, their circumstances were pretty kick-ass, yet they were still unhappy. So maybe, just maybe, I stood a chance and had more to say in this whole happiness thing than my surroundings that night would have led me to believe. I began to look up some statistics on happiness and lack thereof. It's pretty grim. 60% of college students reported feeling anxious in the last year. 40% felt overwhelmed in the past week. Only 33% of Americans report feeling happy. Students remember 81% of negative words they have heard in one day and only 31% of the positive words. And the United States barely cracked the top 20 of 156 countries in terms of its citizens' overall happiness. Finland was number one, if you're wondering. You know, the country where teachers earn a higher salary than almost any other profession. Just saying. So before we continue, it's probably a good idea to define this notion of happiness. After all, it can mean different things to different people. But just to frame this discussion better, I'm going to go with an expert of psychology on happiness. According to Sonia Lyubomirsky, author of The How of Happiness and Myths of Happiness, there are two components. Experience of positive emotions, like generosity, kindness, enthusiasm, friendliness, etc. And number two, satisfaction with how your life is progressing. Are you moving toward your big picture goals? Are you happy with your life overall? Without both of these components, a person will often experience unhappiness and not know why. If you see your life is heading in the right direction and you are moving successfully toward your big picture goals, you may wonder why you are not completely happy. And it could be because you don't actively practice kindness or generosity, or you lack enthusiasm in your day-to-day life. Or maybe you practice all of those positive emotions daily, but still feel like there is something missing. Perhaps because you are not on the path you thought you'd be on in your life. Genuine happiness to the core is a result of these two components. But how do we measure happiness? Well, there are actual scientific surveys that people fill out that can analyze where someone falls on a happiness scale. Questions that cover areas such as how well you deal with setbacks, what your outlook for the future is, what your appreciation for the past is, and what you consider to be your character strengths and weaknesses. Among several other categories, added up, they give you an overall happiness score. Using surveys like these, several long-term studies have been done to help scientists learn more about happiness. One such study tracked 7th graders for decades nationwide. Middle school is a great age to ask happiness questions of, because even though it was about 100 years ago for me, I remember 13 as a tough age to be happy. Those teens in the study who reported having high happiness levels in 7th grade ended up having salaries 10% above the average by age 30. Those in the study who reported being unhappy at age 13 had salaries 30% lower than average by age 30. So what does all of this mean in terms of changing your happiness level? Is it really possible? Thinking back on that night, sitting on my living room floor, I doubted it. I had done everything I could. I worked hard in every aspect of my life. Valedictorian, Rhodes Scholar finalist, Division I school record holder, dedicated wife and mother, and yet I was facing unemployment, possibly losing my house, which would force me to lose my sons, and somehow I was supposed to believe that I could still be happy. It was in my control. What a load of crap. Nearly nothing was in my control. But there's a science behind it, not anecdotal evidence. There are tons of experiments and controlled trials that all pointed to the same conclusion. We could all be happy if we just didn't suck so badly at predicting what makes us happy. One of our problems is we often put the cart before the horse. We associate happiness with things like being rich, having good relationships, getting a good education, but actually, these are often results of being happy. In other words, people who report being happy often live longer, get called back for interviews, and find successful relationships because they are already happy, not as the path to happiness. And the opposite is true. The stress people feel regarding school, job prospects, etc., is counterproductive. It causes negative outcomes, which then inhibit happiness, and the whole thing is just a cycle of dissatisfaction. The bad news is there is a genetic influence on happiness. Studies done on identical twins and fraternal twins show that identical twins will often have similar happiness levels. But just like other factors that are genetically driven, such as weight, blood sugar, and cholesterol, these levels can still be changed. Yeah, there is an inheritable quality to it, but genetic influence doesn't mean biological permanence. You can still change your happiness level the way you can still change and manage your blood sugar level, but you need to put the work in. A major figure in the science behind happiness is Dr. Laurie Santos, a psychologist and cognitive scientist. After observing her students at Yale University and recognizing their increased depression and anxiety, she decided to teach a course on happiness called Psychology in the Good Life. What is happiness and how do we achieve it? She expected 20 students to sign up for the class, but instead, she had 1,200 students enlist in the course. Clearly, people felt they needed guidance on happiness. The homework is more personal and more challenging than many other courses at Yale. Each night, students are expected to 1. Meditate for 10 minutes, 2. Get 8 hours of sleep, 3. Write down 5 things they are grateful for, and 4. Do something kind for others. She warns changing our circumstances will not change our happiness. We think getting married or having a baby, making more money, or getting into colleges we want to will make those of us previously unhappy somehow magically happy. But it doesn't work that way. The only caveat is if you are living in extreme circumstances. If you're in an abusive relationship, if you're living in a war zone in Syria, then yeah, getting out of those horrific circumstances will have an impact on your happiness. But for most of us who live the average life in average ordinary circumstances, those are not the changes that will bring happiness. So overall, there are 8 steps people can practice to achieve happiness. Practice gratitude, practice kindness, chat with a stranger, reduce your choices, be more accepting of bad emotions we feel or obstacles that we face. Stop focusing on an end goal and think about the journey. Count your blessings and take more time to connect with people you care about. For the sake of time, I'm only going to talk about one of these and the science behind it, choosing the topic I feel most people in this room can relate to, counting your blessings. But first, a quick question. Would you rather have a job where you make $50,000 or $100,000? Keep your answer in mind as we move forward. So these are Olympic athletes who just won silver medal. But from the looks on their faces, you can already guess how they're thinking of it. It's not that they won the silver medal, it's that they just lost the gold. And it's not just one athlete or one country or one favorite who finished lower than expected. No, the expression of disappointment with a silver medal knows no barrier. So prolific is this reaction from people who just beat everyone in the world but one person that a study was done on who is happier on the podium, silver medalists or bronze medalists. Using photos from a moment of triumph or of defeat in the Barcelona Olympics, psychology students assigned each athlete a score of 1 to 10, rating the facial expressions of the athletes when they realized they placed either second or third, 1 being the greatest of agony and 10 being the greatest expression of ecstasy. They found that the bronze medalists scored an average of 7.1 out of 10 on a scale of happiness expression, meaning they were above the middle of the road and scoring closer to ecstasy than agony. The silver medalists, they scored an average of 4.8, making them the unhappiest people on the podium. And when you put that score of below 5 into perspective, the silver medalists are not just not as happy as the other people on the podium, they're downright unhappy with their performances. Why would they be less happy than the people they've beaten? It's actually a pretty common cognitive bias that we all fall victim to. We incorrectly frame our experience and we fail to count our blessings. When silver medalists are standing on the podium, more times than not, they're thinking about the gold medal and how close they were to fulfilling their dreams. The goals they had, maybe from the time they were just starting out in the sport, have led to this moment. And nowhere in there did they imagine anything less than gold. The imagined reality is not matching up with the current reality. They are framing their experience by focusing on the imagined reality. The bronze medalists, they're not looking at the gold medalists at all. They're not even looking at the silver medalists, at least not the bronze medalists who scored 7 out of 10 in the Barcelona study. No, instead, they're looking at all the athletes they beat to make it to the podium. They're looking at what they could have missed out on and narrowly achieved. They are framing their experience by appreciating the reality of the moment, not some imagined reality they concocted years ago. Quite simply, they are counting their blessings. The alternative reality we pay attention to frames our experience and affects our happiness. If the silver medalists were able to look at the bronze medalists and all the others they defeated, they probably would have enjoyed the podium moment more. But can we blame them? I mean, after all, we do the same thing all the time. Remember when I asked you if you would rather make $50,000 or $100,000? I think most of us would have been happy choosing $100,000, myself included. But what if I now told you that at your place of work, many people make $50,000, some make $100,000, and a few make $200,000? Would that same salary of $100,000 make you feel just as happy if you knew that there are people around you making $200,000? You might still be happy, but would you be as happy? And then ask yourself this. Think of grades. When a test gets handed back, how happy are you with a B+ when you find out everyone else averaged in the C range? But what if on that same test you still scored the same B+, but then found out everyone else averaged in the A range? Or make it even tougher, you scored an A-, but then found out most people scored either an A or an A+. That A- would feel a lot better if you found out most people were in the B range, wouldn't it? Our desire to compare ourselves to others is often what drives our unhappiness. And what's worse, we often choose the most unreasonable standard to compare ourselves to. We choose the gold medal winner, the one person in the world who is better than us, instead of looking to the left and seeing all the others we have beaten. And while you can argue that competition and comparing ourselves to others can make us driven and increase our productivity, just remember that satisfaction, overall happiness, is quite different from productivity. The science tells us most of us are unhappy living this way. The science. It tells us a lot about how we can become happier, and it's usually not what we think. but are we really willing and ready to make the changes? Are we willing to believe that our circumstances are only 10% of what makes us happy or unhappy? After all, it's a lot easier to be able to sit back, claim to be a victim of circumstance, and not do any of the heavy lifting necessary to frame our experience. Sometimes that living room floor looks so inviting, and getting up from it feels pointless. But I take bigger comfort in the science and in knowing that I have more to say about how happy I can be than anyone or anything else.
Thank you, Ms. Maywath, for reminding us how to stay happy. Thank you to all our speakers for your engaging and fascinating talks. We hope you learned a lot. I know I have. Don't go anywhere just yet, though. Stay tuned for part 3 of TEDxYouth, brought to your living rooms by Sun River Day. We'll be back in 15, so grab yourself a snack or beverage. Can't do that in PAC. Silver linings, people. Make yourself comfy and snuggle in for the last session of talks that will likely change your life. No pressure, though.